Changing world of fashion, in from corset to comfort.
By the time she comes on the catwalk, full of confidence, or as you may think, arrogance, she is a much better, happier girl because she knows it's within her powers to do it well. The sheer way she'll look at you as though I could have you for breakfast if I wanted to is lovely.
When we first got on the catwalk, it was pretty nerve-wracking, but it doesn't worry you so much going on it now. And other thing, we've stood up and talked in front of each other, and it's been really helpful.
Sometimes I can look sophisticated, well, I try to look sophisticated anyway, and other times trendy and young, try and keep my age anyway, try and make myself look younger than I am.
It's always nice when you walk down the streets and you do get a couple of guys that turn around and say, ooh, look at her, and then you think, that's made my day kind of thing.
I think they still like the sexy look. I think that's always been in.
Ideas of what makes a beauty have constantly changed this century. A stunner in one generation may look commonplace in another. What matters is that she feels she looks good. Most women enjoy dressing up, but at the beginning of the century, elaborate styles and expensive materials kept fashion the privilege of the rich.
My mother was very pretty, and I thought so. She was very slim and always wore tight corsets, long black dresses, and she always was very particular about her appearance, as much as she could with the money she had to spend, you know.
Well, I mean, there was no money them days, you know, and I remember having a long skirt on and what we called a rough apron. It was Hessian, and all the women wore these. They had to do wash day and the old day. They didn't really dress up. I don't remember my mother dressing up. I remember the stays, the corsets, where you laced them up the back and you pulled them tight. I do remember that, because I was the one that used to have to pull them.
Tightly corseted and weighed down by layers of clothing, Edwardian ladies managed only the gentlest exercise. A little walking, clutching parasols for protection from the sun, preserved their image of delicacy. Pale skin and the right clothes were signs of good breeding, even for children.
There we were, sitting among the heather on a promontory into the middle of the lake, not a soul within miles. And we were always dressed in absolutely spotless white with enormous hats. And sometimes we were even photographed having fallen into the lake with our skirts spread out round us like sort of water lily leaves. But we said to our mother, why did you dress us in this absolutely idiotic way? And she said, well, I really can't imagine. And then I found a book of children's fashion, and it said that in the 1900s to 1910, no self-respecting mother could have dressed her child in anything but white.
I had very long curly hair at school, and the teacher said, now look, Anne, all the girls have ribbons. So I told my mother about this, and she said, I can't afford a ribbon. So she got a lace out of my dad's shoe, and the teacher played back about that, and then she said, now, get a ribbon from somewhere, Anna. So I was a bit embarrassed about this, so I climbed over the graveyard wall. It was very low. And I went round and I pinched all the ribbons off the wreaths, mauve, pink, all pale colours, you know, because there were no cremations then. So there were all the ribbons on the wreaths, and I had some lovely ribbons. But by God, when my mother got to know her, and the teacher, I really got the cane. I really did. I got a good hiding.
The 1914 war brought visible change. Dress materials became plainer as women talked about economy, and for the first time, class distinction was not immediately obvious from the clothes people wore. Many jobs were impossible in trailing skirts. so women shortened their hems and abandoned their stays. Some even defied all conventions by wearing breeches. But it wasn't only their appearance that changed. They no longer wanted to be gentle, fragile creatures. They wanted to be completely emancipated. After the war, girls shed layers of hampering clothing. By 1926, a woman's outfit weighed only a tenth its Victorian equivalent. Determined to look as different as possible from their mothers, girls flattened their chests and lost their waists. The hourglass figure had apparently gone forever.
I think the 20s were an amazing age for women, for girls getting freedom. I mean, the skirts were cut to above the knee, the long hair was cut to a bob, and one was freed of all the there's sort of underwear restrictions that one's mothers had had. Dancing was our great activity in those days. You could dance extremely cheaply for what was then 2 and 6pence. We went to Olympia, and that was so big that they had 2 dance bands, and they were rather far apart, and one danced right past both of them, and they weren't always synchronized. So you had to sort of alter your steps as you went along so as to work in with the band in whose orbit you were at that particular time.
I'm going to this dance, and my youngest sister sat there watching me makeup and got my suit on and everything, and she said, "Hey, how are they? Where are they?" Being always well developed, you know, I said, "I've shoved them under my arms and I put a stocking round and pull it." I used to put a stocking round and tighten it up and then pull it, you know, and you mind it, all the fashions then were flat, you had to be flat. Fellas didn't like you with the, you know.
Because you weren't supposed to have a figure of any kind. I was very proud of a black chiffon dress which had a slit overskirt, and then underneath was silver lame. So as one Charleston, the thing swung open. Very dashing effect, I thought.
My eldest sister was a lot older than I. She made me a beautiful little pink dress, and my mother bought me a pair of champagne Charleston sandals. And we had a lovely night, and I danced in Charleston all night. Could have still stopped there. But anyway, I had to be home by 10.
We went in short dresses, and then long dresses come in fashion, and they were up at the front and down at the back. And he was my boyfriend, and he didn't like that at all. But everybody had them, so he had to go along with it, and they looked very nice. Well, we thought so, but he says, "I never liked you in that dress." Years after he told me that. No, I think I was just average. I don't think I were a prima donna or anything, just average. My husband said I were pretty.
The new generation of bright young things dressed to please themselves. Their jobs gave them spending power and the courage to be daring. Rayon, the new synthetic material, made flesh-coloured stockings possible and inspired even shorter skirts. They eagerly awaited the new collections from Paris. Cheaper fabrics and simpler lines enabled home dressmakers to copy the styles of the rich. But inspiration for them all was dictated by a handful of famous Parisian fashion houses.
Natalie, do tell us about the new long gowns. I'm just on my way to shop for some. Really? Perhaps you'd like to hear about Monsieur Jacques on the Rue de la Paix?
This French chiffon promised to be the most popular and most becoming garments in Madame's spring wardrobe. This Chanel adaptation features the molded hip line and the new capelet.
You see, Monsieur Jacques' really lovely things. They sound marvelous. And we really have to wear the long skirts and the high waistlines. Well, I'm afraid if we want to appear smartly gowned and in the heights of fashion, we'll just have to.
I used to look at the Tatler and the Bystander and the Sketch and Vogue, and I mean, the whole thing was so glamorous. Life was made up of Noel Coward and Diana Cooper. They looked so marvellous. And I thought, well, I haven't got any brains, so I can't do a clever job, but perhaps I could go and be a model, which was in a way quite shocking. You know, that I was actually going to leave home and go and live in London. My parents were horrified. I had to live in a ladies' club because they thought that was sort of nice and safe. But I paid a shilling fine every night for coming in after 11. It was really an awful tip.
Captain Edward Molyneux, the famous London couturier, gave Sheila a plum job as a model.
I suppose when I was at Molyneux, I did really enjoy being dressed up, and one was allowed to wear the things off duty, so to speak. And I did always take off with a taxi load of clothes and furs that I might be needing to wear during the evening or the weekend.
Conscious of their position as leaders of fashion, society ladies patronising the fashion houses demanded dresses for every occasion. Hardy Amis worked at La Chasse.
Very often they came with maids, and maids, of course, had to approve it. Oh, you can't have that, my lady. It's too much hard work with that white piqué. That'll always be off. I'm not washing that all the time. We've had all those sort of things to confirm with. And then I remember one, I can't remember her name now. I remember a very elegant lady who was custom we shared with Molyneux. I was very proud of her. She came with her maid, and the maid was very vociferous about the choice because she knew she was going to get the dress afterwards when the lady had done with it. So she had a lot to say about the choice of the dress.
I used to make my own clothes, and I made one. It'd just come into fashion with a low back. And I was going to be such a toff with this low back. Well, when my dad saw it, he said, if you don't get some stuff in that back, every time you have it on, I'll put soot on your back. So that would finish of that, so I had to put a piece in.
The wicked backless dress was all the rage after Gertrude Lawrence wore Molyneux's version in Private Lives.
You always had a sweet voice, Amanda.
Thank you.
By the early 30s, their smaller families meant working-class women had more time for fashion, even if it had to be second-hand.
Well, I did this dress agency in Rochdale called Vine House, and the lady used to keep size 16s for me because I paid every week. It was a bob a week, a shilling a week. And, she saved the most marvellous clothes for me. So really, although we were poor, I had some nice clothes, and I never told anybody where I got them from.
Early 30s, the clientele at La Chasse was quite clearly the racing set. And they would come in at the beginning of the racing season, early after Christmas, and order 3 suits to see them through. They wanted practical skirts that didn't bum, and we liked to give them soft tweed, and then we have to persuade them that it would be all right, and it wasn't a mannish look. And it was very pretty, totally unmasculine colours.
The 3/4 length coat of rough lime green tweed, flecked with brown and white, is worn over a skirt of much finer tweed of the same colour.
Did London ever see such a huge assembly of enthusiastic people? For, apart from feelings of devotion to the royal family, the imagination of the British public has been captured by the personality of Princess Marina.
In 1934, when the King's son, the Duke of Kent, married Princess Marina of Greece and Denmark, a new fashion star was born. The packaging of a princess, then as now, promised immediate success. The public rushed to buy Princess Marina hats, and each couturier hoped he would be commissioned to design the dress.
Probably a lot of things will be done in England, but I think the wedding gown will be made at Molyneux's, being an English firm as well.
Yes, I see.
When Princess Marina was going to be married, and she came for all her clothes, then I used to do sort of modelling for her and also do lots of her fittings for the fitters who wanted to be sure to get it right. I mean, Edward's great thing was you should never look at the woman's clothes. You should have to look at the woman and say how beautiful she is. But that's what clothes should be doing for you. You shouldn't be eye-catching because you've got a very short skirt or a very long skirt or something strange. But that was really how he reacted to fashion.
The Duke and Duchess of Kent appear on the balcony. They are joined by the King and Queen, and members of both bride and bridegroom's families, including little Princess Elizabeth, the smallest bridesmaid.
Molyneux never, in fact, was at all helpful to the press. I mean, they hated him. First of all, he wanted everybody to photograph on hideous people like me instead of some marvellous model they'd got who'd never seen the garment before. Maybe it didn't fit her, and she wouldn't know how he would like it shown. We all had to look rather sort of stately and walk up and down this enormous grey room. It was like a sort of rough sea on certain days.
The Depression years put a stop to fashion fantasies in many parts of the country.
Now comes a scheme to lift the young women from their existence of keeping house on the meagre income of dole and relief, while hopelessly seeking jobs themselves. Mannequin training is now offered. At her own expense, Miss Lucy Clayton, leading mannequin trainer, has brought some girls from South Wales to her London school, giving them a chance in a sphere which is as the poles apart from their life at home.
With a little exercise and training, 1930s Cinderellas might find fame and fortune. As ever, good looks could become a passport to a new life.
After their fortnight's training, Miss Clayton guarantees to find jobs for the girls, starting at £3 a week. Very different from their bleak prospects in Wales.
Are you glad you came, Megan? Indeed I am, Miss Clayton. I had to leave Wales to get a job, and this is my big chance. This is like starting life all over again.
The cinema, more than anything else in the 30s, brought fashion to the high street, as girls fantasised about a better, or at any rate, a different image.
Oh, I had a passion for movie stars. I was going to be the biggest Hollywood star that ever was. But I used to go from one extreme to the other. For instance, one day I was the best dancer. Ginger Rogers was my ideal. And another day there was passion, there was the dark hair of Joan Crawford, and then there was the clipped tone of Betty Davis. And the great thing that I had was a tremendous imagination. I looked at myself in the looking glass, and I was always convinced that I really did look like the people.
It had everything, that film, and the epitome of success as a girl was Scarlett O'Hara surrounded by the young men image, and that was what you were aiming.
Top stars competed to be the ultimate woman in the film that was to be one of the cinema's greatest ever hits, playing to packed houses for years to come. But Gone with the Wind did little to advance the cause of modern woman.
A young hat model named Edith Mariner, later to be known as Susan Hayward.
I love you.
Lana Turner.
I love you.
Paulette Goddard.
I love you.
Frances D.
I love you. You're afraid to marry me. Why, you'd rather live with that stupid little fool who can't open her mouth except to say yes and no. And raise a passel of mealy-mouthed brats just like her. And you made me believe that you wanted to marry me.
Charlotte,
why, it's true, you did, and I shall hate you till the day I die.
The cinema's powerful images assumed even greater importance during the war.
Body.
The potential of such a propaganda tool was not lost on a government determined to use all it could, from documentary film to women's magazines, to get its message across.
There was a committee formed from the editors of about a dozen magazines, and they used to call us to the various ministries when they had something they wanted to put over. They wanted women to do or not to do certain things, to join up or to go into factories.
Here, bus conductresses are being taught the gentle art of ticket punching and fare collecting. In their new uniforms, they present a smart and very pleasantly efficient appearance. Bus queues look like being longer than ever in the near future. Tribute is due not only to these, but to all other women in the country who are responding so readily to the call for volunteers.
The mass circulation people had got enormous power, and the ministers used to say they will listen to what you tell them when they won't read our pamphlets, and that was absolutely true. I remember them telling us that they were horrified that girls were going into factories with hairstyles that were totally unsuitable and being too fashion conscious to wear the caps that they were given, and they got their hair caught in machines, and some were literally scalped. And they said, can you persuade them that the chic thing would be to have your hair cut short?
Wartime brings its own styles in hair and hats. In fact, the two go together, says Vasco, the eminent coiffurist. Military millinery can be very becoming, a brim suiting some and others a tin.
In the ARP, because we were on night duty, we wore dungarees and a tin hat, which incidentally we were supposed to have on our shoulder, but I wore it on my head most of the time because the whole outfit was very, very stunning.
New clothes and materials were expensive and rationed. A suit alone required 18 of the 20 coupons allocated every 6 months.
In October, 20 new clothing coupons became available for spending.
Now, don't rush out and spend them straight away.
I was never short of coupons. I could give somebody coupons because I hadn't enough money to spend them.
We haven't got enough coupons. And I've got to have a few for towels and things for the house.
Perhaps we can help you. And who may you be? Your old clothes, put away and forgotten. Use us now, for instance. I could make a smart costume for the young lady.
My wedding dress. I'd like to be a nightdress and panties.
Well, folks, what are you waiting for?
Why not get together with your friends and form a make, do, and mend group? Then you can all help each other.
Wartime clothes were functional, not pretty, designed to use as little material as possible. The Board of Trade's utility clothes regulations govern the fashion scene. Even top couturiers had to conform.
Although I was in the army, I was doing some designing. Utility clothes man was glad to do something because you felt that you weren't just being a drone and a shop that catered only for rich women. You thought you were being useful in some way. I never felt in the least bit constrained by the utility restrictions because I'd always liked very plain clothes. And by this time I'd become friendly with the famous Captain Molyneux, and he told me that he felt the same.
He'd be looking at the garment, then in came the Gestapo, which was a girl called Maudie, whose responsibility was the Board of Trade documents. And every day they'd send in amendments, like, we've just done the hem, now you can't have a 3-inch hem, it can only be 2 inches, or you can't have 5 buttons on there, you can only have 3, or you mustn't have a pocket.
Such things as velvet collars are taboo by utility standards, so is a double row of buttons.
All of this, of course, took place in the air raids, and I was always, full of pins when the things got really noisy, and Edward used to say, do you want to go down to the shelter? With a very threatening look, and I'd say, oh, no, 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 thank you, I'd much rather be here. So we used to get on with it.
Rationing continued for several years after the war, and things like stockings, which women had always taken for granted, remained hard to find. But with a little enterprise, girls could still look properly dressed.
Our local chemists used to make their own leg makeup, which was a powder with water, which we had to shake up in the bottle and then paint it on with cotton wool or something. But unfortunately, it wasn't waterproof.
You could buy bottles of leg makeup, but if you hadn't enough money, well, you would put gravy browning on, and then the flies would come after if it was a hot day.
We did get to this very inventive way of doing with penciling a line up the back of our legs, or sometimes even clocks on the side of the legs near the ankles.
Man-made materials such as nylon, used for parachutes during the war, were to have a huge impact once it was over. But in Britain, the new popular nylons were hard to come by.
Let me say at once that we don't know whether any of these nylon stockings will be in Britain by Christmas or not. Even if they are, we're prepared to bet there won't be anything like enough to go round. But at least we can see that they are being made, and if anyone hopes to get a pair, well, there's no harm in hoping.
We had terrible difficulty finding nylons, and that was one way of being always immaculate and stylish. We would have a rumour spread around that there would be a man in Oxford Street, buy Selfridges, buy John Lewis, wherever.
Yes, they're right here in the bag. Nylons by the dozen. Fantasies in cellophane. What puzzles British housewives is, why are there not more in the shops? They seek them here, they seek them there. But always they seem to end up on that pavement pitch where stocks are high, business is brisk, and life's only worry is taken care of by the lookout man.
Gina Frattini and I were the wild ones who would just get down the back stairs, out of the fashion school, and off to Oxford Street. Invariably it happened that when we got back, we'd find that one foot was cut off or wasn't there, or there was a terrible blue thread through the leg of the stocking or whatever. But it really was a nightmare.
Tantalizing, isn't it? They actually fit. Sorry, no good calling at the box office afterwards. We don't know where you can find them.
In 1947, Christian Dior launched what became known as the New Look. Models who'd have looked at home in Gone with the Wind revealed the most feminine shape in years.
What amused me, though, was realizing how fashion changed your whole posture and your whole attitude and your movements. Suddenly found myself having to pick my skirt up in two hands to go up the steps of a bus. And I realized that I hadn't seen that gesture since I'd seen my mother before the First World War.
Outraged feminists protested that once again fashion was restricting women's freedom of movement and that they would soon be as badly off as their mothers and grandmothers. As clothes and materials were still rationed, the new style was also opposed by the president of the Board of Trade.
Well, it isn't for me to say how the long skirts and the short skirts look. With the shortage of materials and of manpower, most people would agree it just doesn't make sense to have the skirts longer than they have been in the past, in the recent past. I'm sure all the ladies will understand that the longer you have your skirts, the fewer there'll be of them.
Certainly, the new look is still very much a matter of personal choice. Here, for example, are some new evening gowns for the summer season of 1948.
What I did was to make the biggest skirt in the whole world, apart from a genuine Dior, out of blackout material, because all the blackout curtains had been torn down, and we still had it up in the attic. And it was the only way in which one could, with some economy, that is, for one's purse, get something immense and devastatingly generous.
The new line is called Envol, or Fly Away. All very charming, but I should think it would fly away with your money and your coupons. Just look at the amount of material in this one.
The image was well-groomed, coiffured women, and they had to look as though they'd been to the hairdressers. It wasn't done to look natural. The salon I worked at when I was a junior had a very clever layout because you had to go to reception, then walk right through the salon to go to the cloakroom. So it's like a fashion parade. They used to really dress up to get their hair done. In those days, it was minks and minks and minks.
In the early 1950s, young girls had no style of their own. They all wanted to look like the mature, sophisticated models of the moment. Cherry Marshall had the smallest waist in London.
I used to go shopping with my two kids on a Saturday with high heel shoes and, you know, sort of perhaps a waspy on and being so uncomfortable. My hair well groomed, and it was stressed the whole time. If you're a model, you must look like a model on and off duty. The worst thing for me was that I could never find a good deodorant. I don't think they existed. And you know, if you're terribly nervous or you perspire, and everyone was appalled if you perspired at all. You know, it was a nightmare for me. It was considered very, very common to perspire, to sweat, you know.
They all seemed to me, because I was so young, to be very moral women.
Bring it forward. Over.
Whether they were or not, I don't know. But they seemed very moral. They didn't seem as flash as model girls do nowadays.
Bedtime atmosphere at Grosvenor House. But an eye-opener for the fashion experts was this sheer nightdress of white nylon with its permanent pleating featured in a display by Britain's top designers. But if it's not yet quite time for bed, you can lounge in comfort in this Jersey housecoat with its striking feline attraction, leopard-style cuffs. Barbara Golan, one of our leading models, is the lovely wearer.
In many people's eyes, Fiona Campbell-Walter, later Baroness Thiessen, was the most beautiful mannequin in the 50s. An admiral's daughter, Fiona was sent to Lucy Clayton's to learn how to model.
She was supposed to be a lady, and it was the time of the coronation, so everything was very regal. And there were a few of us who had longer necks than the others and could look snooty and haughty and very aristocratic and very grand. I mean, if you were actually walking with your nose in the air and your mouth open catching flies, you couldn't see the ground. You would actually fall flat on your face. It was very constricting and constraining to be dominated by somebody else's attitude. You know, we were really playing the role of wealthy elderly women in ermines, in sort of ascot clothes, in very dignified ball gowns and so on, which left absolutely no room for the young people we really were.
Very much in the limelight, too, was a young man who was unknown to the general public only a few days ago. By the princess, the glittering occasions are taken in the royal stride. Mr. Armstrong Jones was facing something new, and he bore himself admirably, greeting a fellow photographer as he left the foyer.
In the 50s, when I started, a model used to arrive, do her own hair, do her own makeup, indeed have her own accessories, like shoes and gloves. And it would just be the suit that would be supplied by the magazine. There were professional models, of course, and they got paid a huge amount of £3 an hour, which was a lot of money, because I used to get 19.6 a page, because Jocelyn Stevens on Queen magazine refused to ever pay me £1.
The style of photography of those days was you were totally immobile. You were pinned to your dress or you were pinned to the wall, so no movement was expected or indeed possible. It was very difficult to be ladylike when you were only just able to contain yourself within the dress.
I'm afraid I never took it very seriously, and I used to like sending it off a bit. There's that photograph in, I think it was June '57 Vogue or something like that, where somebody was giving the model a tray of drinks, and all the drinks are falling over. I spent hours suspending things on nylon thread, impeccably tied, so that each cup, glass, and everything was overspilling, trying to make for more life, more realism.
By the late 50s, teenagers were breaking with convention. Fed up with dressing like their mothers, they created fashions of their own. Their particular style was influenced by America and led by the avant-garde at the new art schools.
My mother thought I ought to look proper, and I was 17, and I was probably the only person there in a dress. It was a striped shirtwaister, and I had very starched petticoats on.
I had a uniform of duffel coat, black jumper, usually fairly dark colours. I did do a lot of dyeing. I dyed most of my clothes purple.
Everybody else was wearing jeans or tight black leggings and a duffel coat. And sort of, you kept your duffel coat on all day and you didn't take it off.
We discovered we could be sort of embryonic beatniks and wear black stockings, and pranced off to art school thinking I was just the latest word in existentialism.
This song coming is a song you know very well. It's a song you call Autumn Leaves, and we call it Les Feuilles Mortes.
There was very much an influence of very avant-garde actresses like Juliet Greco, and of course she looked like a grown-up art student. She had lots of black eye makeup on, lots of lines, and this very white mouth, and of course that was how everybody wanted to look then. That was the look.
Où nous étions amis. En ce temps-là, la vie était plus belle.
My mother always used to say I ought to get my hair permed because it looked so awful, long and lank. But that was the last thing I wanted to do, was kind of look pretty. I think it was very anti-looking pretty.
I remember being told once by a very irate tutor that if I spent enough time practicing my lettering as I did on drawing my eyeliner, I'd make something of myself.
In 1964, for the first time, haute couture in Paris followed high street boutiques. Corsets introduced his space-age collection, revealing knees for the first time in a designer label.
When the miniskirts first appeared, it was quite exciting. I'd seen a fashion show. I rushed home and promptly pinned all my skirts up and started altering them, which was great. It was a lovely look.
In the 60s, I think people really were affected by fashion. Everybody had to wear a mini, even if they had bandy legs and were 5'1".
It was very new and different, and I think it changed the atmosphere.
The fashion business, the fashion media, swing in London, which is a term that Time magazine coined, really happened. And you couldn't believe the impact it had. I mean, it made life so exciting. Until that point, daughters wanted to look at their mums. After the 60s, mums wanted to look at their daughters. Skirts went up, everything. You know, it was just sheer madness.
Paco Rabanne, a French architect and dress designer, is responsible for these creations in metal and plastic linked together by wire rings. A suit of armour was never exactly comfortable, But a girl will suffer anything for fashion. At least it implies that she's got something worth defending.
I think it was just a general feeling around then in the 60s that women were far more free than they'd ever been before, and part of it was wearing the short skirts. It was something to do with taking the pill, it was something to do with getting meaningful jobs, it was something to do with life wasn't just about having babies and standing in the kitchen and cooking and cleaning up.
It was a time when people became liberated. It was smart to be seen with your hairdresser.
The one-eyed look laid on by Vidal Sassoon, a young hairdresser from the East End of London who assists the first show of a new French house. The winsome David Bailey shows how to bring out the best in a woman with a combination of charm and authority.
Hang about, this is marvellous. Good. Open your mouth slightly. You see, what you've got to remember is that everything was against people like Bailey and I becoming photographers.
That left elbow, let it go out all of it. No, that's the right one, Angel. You've got problems.
He was designed to be a tailor's assistant, you know, and I was going to be loading sugar down Tate & Lyle. And there really wasn't people from where we came from being photographers, you know?
Good. Make that, let me... No, David, who told you to move? Go back to where you were. Come on. Back to where you were.
I lived in Bath, but it didn't have little boutiques in it at that point. I think there was one, but I couldn't afford the clothes. So I would go to Vogue Patterns and I would actually create the things that I wanted to make. And I remember making one black print dress with purple turquoise and I guess orange print on it. It was a sort of a halter neck, and I wore it with fishnet tights, and I thought it was so fab, and purple shoes that I dyed. And I must have looked atrocious, and plus huge sort of beaded jewellery that you sort of wore in sort of lollops from your earlobes. It was absolutely ghastly. I mean, it was really awful, but I was passionate for anything I made. It was very important to me.
The swinging scene of Royal Ascot. The Duke of Norfolk, who looks after protocol, has forbidden trouser suits in the royal enclosure, but he said nothing at all about hemline.
To dress the Queen in a miniskirt was difficult. We said, oh, ma'am, you must have a bit shorter. And she would sit down and just see what happened when she sat down. And that was the crux of the matter. And she was perfectly right. I'd like it the length of the last strands, we would say, or something. Always immensely polite. I hated the miniskirt, and I hated Mary Quant. She said, this is the end of couture. Well, it wasn't the end of couture, but it was the end of the influence of couture. And that, I think, is the most significant thing that has happened during my working life as a dress designer, that the importance of the influence of the couture has stopped. But on the other hand, I have to congratulate her because she really started the independence of the designer making off-the-peg clothes.
Mary Quant had identified a new mass market. Girls in the high street, eager for the latest styles, were to become the designer's target for the next decade. Quant clothes became increasingly distinctive. She turned evening materials like satin and velvet into daytime wear and experimented with new fabrics like PVC and synthetic fur. Cheaper production methods gave everyone a chance to follow fashion.
Young girls wanted to wear instant fashion. They didn't want to have things made for themselves anymore. They wanted to go out, buy it, and wear it that night.
It was dictated to you by your friends, so what she had, you had, and if she had a shorter skirt, you had a shorter skirt, and if she had a bell-bottom, crimp-lean psychedelic trouser suit, you got one too. And it was very important that you actually kept up with the person next door to you, yes.
However much people thought the 60s fashions brought a chance of individuality, they often felt like a uniform. Even makeup was applied to a set pattern, the aim an unnatural, doll-like appearance.
God, I wore so much makeup. It was actually like a mask. I think I had more pairs of false eyelashes, which I used to sort of stick on the mirror at night.
I was never very good at false eyelashes. That was one of my problems in the 60s. I never looked quite right. Sometimes I'd manage to get them on for the odd special occasion, but I never had a good hand with eyelashes. I tended to get them crooked or falling off a little. So I decided in the end to sort of manage with my own.
Models were no longer expected to be well-bred sophisticates. Girls like Jean Shrimpton and later Twiggy changed the image forever and left a generation of women feeling distinctly overweight.
With her boyish haircut and a figure so slim that a bust is hardly discernible, she's invaded a world which once seemed reserved for rather older, upper-class ladies and emerged as the first truly classless top model.
The image of the boyish waif became international and the ideal of the French fashion houses.
Givenchy, as you know, was always very much for slender ladies, as in Audrey Hepburn. And I took him a Playboy magazine, and I unfolded it. He always used to come to my fittings. I unfolded and showed, and I said, now, you've got to take account that some ladies have boobs, and this is what a lot of normal women look like. They have huge breasts, and this great naked centerfold came out. I mean, he looked like he'd been struck in the face with wet fish and staggered back and said, I don't believe it. You mean to say there are really women like that? And I said, sure, lots of them. And I said, they don't necessarily want to have or can afford to have Givenchy dresses, but they are there, and maybe you should make allowances for it, because I wasn't all that skinny. At any rate, he said, can I borrow it? And he disappeared. We had hysterical giggles upstairs where he was showing everybody what normal women looked like. But he did make some small concessions to, you know, ladies having bosoms after that, I think. It was radical alteration.
Give me a head with hair, long, beautiful hair, shining, gleaming, streaming black wax.
In the late 60s, hippie and flower power styles caught on as it became fashionable to knock imperialism abroad and materialism at home.
Show it, long as got to going on.
I did go to a couple of things like the Isle of Wight festivals, which were just wonderful. Everybody painted transfers on their face and wore flowing Indian robes and had flowers in their hair.
It was very much the flower child, the hippie, wonderful hairdos, amazingly extraordinary shoes.
Blow it, show it, long as got to going on.
When I was on The Observer, we suddenly noticed, I suppose it was the first street cred, whatever the word is, fashion that young people had started to get out the dressing up box and put on extraordinary things. And also I think it was the beginning of all those funny clothes coming from Afghanistan and the hippie trail, so that it became more and more fancy dress, the look.
Do you want this style? That's beautiful, that one.
Oh, that's a gas, yeah. Well, it's really just a personal thing, you know. There really is no particular type of look. Now, that really is me.
A great kind of combination of the sexes. There was less of a discrimination between men's clothes and women's clothes. Unisex became very strong. You went to the same hairdresser, you wore the same shirts, the same trousers. There was a tremendous combination of fashion.
You had places like Bieber, which were, I remember as a teenager thinking it was a very exciting place to go, where sort of girls were ripping off their clothes because the changing rooms were fairly sort of ambivalent at the time.
I know that she's no peasant.
I think the most radical change was one simply didn't want to wear all those rather tougher underpinnings anymore. You know, I mean, bras and belts sort of held everybody in, do you know? And I mean, instinctively, we all wanted a freedom of body, really, and which went with freedom of thought, I suppose.
My wedding dress was jean muir, and it was satin back creped, really beautiful, down to sort of mid-calf, and I had the most terrible shoes dyed. I got to the registry office, and my aunt said to me, but you can't go on like that, dear, your nipples are showing. Haven't you got a bra? So I had to rush back to the house and borrow one of the bridesmaids' bras. We both had to go together, and she went braless, and I had to have one that covered up the indecency on my chest.
I have brought you many things in my time, but the most successful of all was an invention of mine they called punk-a-lock.
The most extreme reaction against conventional fashion came with punk dressing. Malcolm McLaren and his girlfriend Vivienne Westwood launched punk couture.
All the motifs on punk rock were to do with third world things or anti-materialistic things, things you would pick up from the gutter and pin on your clothes, just as a savage might take feathers or something he regarded as attractive to look at. On the other hand, a lot of people pinned things that they thought were worthless or silly, things like babies' dummies and the Queen with a safety pin in, swastikas, those things.
Make you feel very heroic, all those things. They add to the whole feeling that you have. They're very romantic.
It's got nothing to do with the 50s or the 60s. It's a sort of a fashion from the present and the future. It's a symptom. The ideas come from the violence in the streets and kids with no work, out of work, and a general feeling that there's nothing to do. And they always want to be different, and they want to express themselves in a violent, shocking way.
Move! Come on, get him on.
Today, women choose fashion to suit their lifestyle, whether it's punk or classical, Marks and Spencer or designer, casual or severe. Yet they dream as ever about looking like someone else. Always ready to provide a new image, the marketing men are busy manufacturing the woman of the 90s.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to our celebration of Fendi.
The lady who is designed to be wearing the Fendi fragrance should be a woman of the 90s, a lady who's in control of her life. She's probably got a good job, she's probably a lady who can afford good clothes, but she's very much a woman who wants to explore the other side of her personality, her sensuality and her sexuality. What you have to do with a fragrance is you have to aim it at an image, and then what you hope is that people want to aspire to be that person.
Fendi, the passion of Rome.
Probably that woman does exist, but there won't be very many of her. But there'll be an awful lot of women out there in Britain who want to be like that. And they may not be able to afford the expensive clothes and the beautiful jewellery, but they probably can afford the fragrance. And when they put that perfume on, they suddenly become that woman.
What is nice now, there isn't such a thing, I don't think, as fashion, which is wonderful. Everything is kind of acceptable in a funny sort of way.
English women can look very, very glamorous, but they don't like being chic with a capital C. English women think it's a little vulgar.
Now suddenly women are coming through saying, I've got a good job, I can run my life, I can drive my car, I can buy my own house, and I want to be able to feel comfortable as a woman.
I think the most important thing about women is their spirit, not what they look like, because that doesn't last too long.
Life's short enough. When you get turned 70, every day is a bonus, isn't it? So you must keep yourself nice, if you can afford it, and do the best with what you have. If you've got a husband and you want to keep him, you've got to dress, haven't you, to keep your husband. Otherwise, he's going to say, well, I'm not going out with you if you look like that.
Next week, Her Indoors sees how much and how little has changed for women at home.
Wilt thou have this woman to thy wedded wife?
Ja, mit Gottes Hilfe.
Wherever you go.
Starting this Wednesday on BBC Two, the first part of a major new drama, Christabel. The film, written by Dennis Potter, tells the true story of Christabel Bielenberg, a young English bride who makes a commitment to married life in a country soon to be at war with her own.
We have to stop them before it's too late.
Adam, isn't that just wishful thinking? The Germany we wanted and hoped for...
You're saying it's already gone? Smashed to pieces, totally beyond repair?
Yes.
No, lads. Show Mum.